My priority is to deliver Brexit, and to do so in an orderly way that does not disrupt people's lives. So I continue to believe we need to leave the European Union with a deal as soon as possible. And of course this House has voted repeatedly to avoid a no deal. Yet despite the efforts of members on all sides, we have not so far been able to vote for a deal. So ahead of the Council, I wrote to President Tusk to seek a short extension to the Article 50 period to the 30th of June. Critically, I also requested that any extension should be terminable, so that whenever this House agrees a deal and ratifies the withdrawal agreement, we can get on and leave. And I did this not merely to avoid a further delay beyond ratification of the withdrawal agreement, but specifically to retain our ability to leave the EU without having to hold European parliamentary elections on the 23rd of May. Mr. Speaker, the discussions at the Council were difficult, and unsurprisingly, many of our European partners share the deep frustration that I know so many of us feel in this House over the current impasse. There was a range of views about the length of an extension, with a large number of member states preferring a longer extension to the end of this year or even into the next. In the end, what was agreed by the UK and the EU 27 was a compromise, an extension lasting until the end of October. The Council also agreed that we would update on our progress at the next meeting in June. Critically, as I requested, the Council agreed that this extension can be terminated when the withdrawal agreement has been ratified. So, for example, if we were to pass a deal by the 22nd of May, we would not have to take part in European elections, and when the EU has also ratified, we will be able to leave at 11 p.m. on the 31st of May. In short, the date of our departure from the EU and our participation in the European parliamentary elections remains a decision for this House. As President Tusk said last night, during this time the course of action will be entirely in the UK's hands. In agreeing this extension, there was some discussion in the Council about whether stringent conditions should be imposed on the UK for its EU membership during this period, but I argued against this. I put the case that there is only a single tier of EU membership with no conditionality attached beyond existing treaty obligations. The Council conclusions are clear that during the course of the extension, the UK will continue to hold full membership rights. In turn, I assured my fellow leaders that the UK will continue to be bound by all our ongoing obligations as a member state, including the duty of sincere cooperation. The United Kingdom plays a responsible and constructive role on the world stage, and we always will. That is the kind of country we are. The choices we face are stark, and the timetable is clear. I believe we must now press on at pace with our efforts to reach a consensus on a deal that is in the national interest. I welcome the discussions that have taken place with the opposition in recent days and the further talks which are resuming today. This is not the normal way of British politics, and it is uncomfortable for many in both the government and opposition parties. Reaching an agreement will not be easy, because to be successful it will require both sides to make compromises. But however challenging it may be politically, I profoundly believe that in this unique situation, where the House is deadlocked, it is incumbent on both front benches to seek to work together to deliver what the British people voted for. And I think that the British people expect their politicians to do just that when the national interest demands it. I hope that we can reach an agreement on a single unified approach that we can put to the House for approval. But if we cannot do so soon, then we will seek to agree a small number of options for the future relationship that we will put to the House in a series of votes to determine which course to pursue. And as I have made clear before, the Government stands ready to abide by the decision of the House, but to make this process work, the opposition would need to agree to this too. With the House's consent, we could also bring forward the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, which is a necessary element of any deal, whichever course we take. This bill will take time to pass through both houses, so if we want to get on with leaving, we need to start this process soon. And it could also provide a useful forum to resolve some of the outstanding issues in the future relationship. Crucially, Mr. Speaker, any agreement on the future relationship may involve a number of additions and clarifications to the political declaration. So I'm pleased that at this Council all 27 Member States responded to my update on the ongoing cross-party talks by agreeing that the European Council is prepared to reconsider the political declaration on the future relationship in accordance with the positions and principles stated in its guidelines and statements. The Council also reiterated that the withdrawal agreement itself could not be reopened. Mr. Speaker, I know the whole country is intensely frustrated that this process to leave the European Union has not still been completed. I never wanted to seek this extension, and I deeply regret that we have not yet been able to secure agreement in this House for a deal that would allow us to leave in a smooth and orderly way. I know too that this whole debate is putting members on all sides of the House under immense pressure and causing uncertainty across the country, and we need to resolve this. So let's use the opportunity of the recess to reflect on the decisions that will have to be made swiftly on our return after Easter, and let us then resolve to find a way through this impasse, so that we can leave the European Union with a deal as soon as possible, so that we can avoid having to hold those European parliamentary elections, and above all, so that we can fulfil the democratic decision of the referendum, deliver Brexit and move our country forward. This is our national duty as elected members of this House, and nothing today is more pressing or more vital, and I commend this statement to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of her statement. Mr. Speaker, yesterday EU leaders agreed to grant the United Kingdom an Article 50 extension to the 31st of October. This means that Britain will now have to start the process of holding European elections in the extraordinary situation of not knowing whether new MEPs will take their seats or for how long. This has come just 3 weeks after the Prime Minister told the House she was not prepared to delay Brexit any longer than the 30th of June. The second extension in the space of a fortnight represents not only a diplomatic failure, but is another milestone in the government's mishandling of the entire Brexit process. A measure of this could be seen in this House on Monday, when 1/3 of her party voted against her own policy to request a short delay and 4 of her cabinet members abstained. And can the Prime Minister also confirm that the request by the Leader of the House on Tuesday for the EU to reopen the withdrawal agreement has also been rebuffed? The Prime Minister stuck rigidly to a flawed plan, and now the clock has run down, leaving Britain in limbo and adding to the deep uncertainty of business, workers and people all across this country. Mr. Speaker, I welcome that the Prime Minister finally decided to reach out to the opposition last week and open talks to try and find a breakthrough. The fact that the invitation didn't even come at the 11th hour, but at 5 past midnight, 3 days after the Prime Minister had missed her own Brexit deadline of the 29th of March, is a reflection of the government's fundamental error in not proceeding by consensus. However, Mr. Speaker, I can report to the House that the talks now taking place between the opposition and the government are serious, detailed and ongoing, and I welcome the constructive engagement that we've had. Although this view may not be universally shared by many on the Conservative benches, I also welcome the indications from the government they may be willing to move in the key areas that have prevented the Prime Minister's deal from being supported on this side of the House. If these talks are to be a success, resulting in an agreement that will bring our country back together, the government will have to compromise. That is why it is with disappointment that I read the Secretary of State for International Trade's letter this week, in what seemed to be an attempt to scupper meaningful talks by all but ruling out Labour's customs union proposals. A proposal, I might add, which is supported by business and industry bodies as well as by all leading trade unions in this country. It is a proposal that European Union leaders and the Irish Taoiseach just yesterday have said is both credible and negotiable. Labour will continue to engage constructively in talks because we respect the result of the referendum and we are committed to defending jobs, industry and living standards by delivering a close economic relationship with the European Union and securing frictionless trade with improved rights and standards. If that is not possible, we believe all options should remain on the table, including the option of a public vote. And, Mr. Speaker, we see no advantage in the proposals of the Secretary of State for International Trade to create distance and divergence in our trading relationship with our largest trading partner. This House must also bear in mind that after a deal has passed, the current Prime Minister has said she will step down. We have no idea who may succeed her. So with that in mind, we have to entrench any agreement, because some of those already throwing their hats into the ring have said they would scrap the Human Rights Act, they would rip up burdensome regulation, or would even prefer to leave without any deal at all. Some on the Conservative benches want nothing more than to use Brexit to create a race to the bottom, opening up our economy to US big pharma companies in our National Health Service, hormone-treated beef on our plates, slash workers' rights and consumer standards, and to have the UK become a virtual tax haven on the shores of Europe. Let me be clear to the Prime Minister and to the country: Labour will not support any deal that would leave us open to such a dystopian vision for the future of this country. It is incumbent on all of us now to find a way forward. We must continue to talk to each other, and if the government is serious, the red lines must move, and we must see a real compromise. I look forward to the discussions in the coming days, and even at this late stage, to work to find a deal that can command not only the support of this House, but, perhaps more importantly, the support of the public across this country too.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I say to the Leader of the Opposition that the talks between the Government and the Opposition have indeed been serious. They are detailed and they are being taken forward in a constructive and positive fashion. We did, of course, offer talks at an earlier stage than very recently, but I'm pleased that we are now able to sit down in this way. He raised the issue about the European parliamentary elections. Of course, had members in this House voted with a majority to agree the withdrawal agreement on the 29th of March, we would have guaranteed leaving on the 22nd of May and not holding the European parliamentary elections. At the time, obviously, the Right Honourable Gentleman didn't feel able to support a deal to enable us not to hold those European parliamentary elections. It is still possible to do so, and we will continue to work on that. He talked about the need for us to protect jobs, industry and living standards, and indeed that is what we have been aiming to do with the deal that we agreed with the European Union. But not just in relation to the deal with the European Union. Actually, it is this government that has presided over record levels of people in employment. It is this government that has seen helping people with their living standards with tax cuts for 32 million people. He talked about the future relationship and the need to entrench aspects of the future relationship. Of course, the government did on the 29th of March say that we would accept the amendment that was put down on the order paper by the honourable member for Stoke-on-Trent Central, which would require Parliament to have that role in looking at the future relationship and the negotiating objectives for the future. And what that clearly makes the case is that any government, as it's going through those negotiations, will of course have to ensure that they are taking Parliament with them in agreeing that future relationship. And on the issue of coming together in an agreement, the point is very simple. I'm not prepared just to accept Labour's policies. The Labour Party isn't prepared just to accept our policies. As the honourable gentleman, the member for Holborn and St Pancras, has said, this takes compromise on both sides, and that's what we're doing, sitting down seriously to find a way that enables this House to ensure that there is a deal that commands a majority, so we can leave the European Union, fulfil the vote of the British people in 2016 in the referendum, and do so in a way that does indeed protect jobs and living standards and industry.
Mr. Kenneth Clarke. May I urge my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, to stick to her commitment to lead the country through to the conclusion of the Brexit process and to ignore some of the vicious attacks being made upon her by our more extreme right-wing colleagues. Can I also ask her, given that she rightly points out in the national interest that the next obvious step is to reach a settlement between the government and the principal opposition party on the best way forward, can she indicate that it is clear that the minimum that requires is some sort of customs arrangement and sufficient regulatory alignment, at least to keep our trade as open and free as it has been across the Channel and in the Republic of Ireland? And can she negotiate that so it does actually bind any successor government in future negotiations?
My right honourable and learned friend is right that, of course, as we look to that future relationship, we are looking at the customs arrangement that would be in place in that future relationship. We have already indicated, as is reflected, in fact, in the political declaration, that we want to retain the benefits of a customs union, of no tariffs, no quotas, no rules of origin checks, and that is provided for in the political declaration. Stands. Of course, what we do see is we haven't been able to enshrine that in legal text, because it's not possible for the European Union to negotiate that treaty with us until we're a third country, until we're out of the European Union. So any commitments that are made here will be about the negotiating objectives that we take through into that process, but there will still be negotiations to be had with the European Union. But in terms of adding to and clarifying what is in that political declaration and the position of the UK government. Obviously, as I've indicated, the EU Council have said that they would be willing to look at additions and clarifications to that political declaration.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of her statement. Mr Speaker, what a total fiasco the past few weeks, months and years have been under this shambolic Tory government. The UK did not leave the EU in March, and thankfully, given the efforts of SNP politicians and others in this place, and the goodwill of the European Union, we will not crash out of the EU on Friday. What an irony that it's the European Union that's got the UK out of this mess. Let that be a lesson for members in this place. It is the EU that has put the interest of our citizens in the UK first, our businesses, our farmers and our fishermen. We should not be lambasting the EU, we should be thanking them. With the European Union agreeing to a further extension to Article 50, the Prime Minister must use this time to hold a second EU referendum with the option of remaining on the ballot paper. It is now a very real possibility that we can remain in the European Union. Mr Speaker, there were a total of 133 days between the 1997 general election and the devolution referendum in Scotland. As of today, there are 204 days until the new Brexit deadline on the 31st of October. So will the Prime Minister now remove the ridiculous excuse that there isn't enough time to hold a second referendum with Remain on the ballot paper? Scotland did not vote for Brexit and should not be forced to accept any Brexit deal that will harm our interests. The only way forward is to put the decision back to the people. Scotland will not support a Brexit deal cooked up by the Brexit-supporting Labour and Tory parties. So, Mr Speaker, let me ask this. Prime Minister, yesterday you ducked and dived my questioning, so a simple yes or no will suffice. Has your government offered a second EU referendum in talks with the Labour Party? Yes or no? Has the Labour Party requested a second EU referendum in the talks? Yes or no? Is the Labour Party cozying up to the Tories, asking to end freedom of movement as a price for their support for a Tory deal? Yes or no? And finally, Mr Speaker, will the Prime Minister recognise that she cannot fix this mess alone? Stop ignoring the people of Scotland. Open up meaningful discussions with the devolved governments and with civic society. Start leading by listening, Prime Minister, and please get her head out of the sand.
I say to the right honourable gentleman. The government has not offered a second referendum. And our position, I said to him yesterday in PMQs that our position on that issue had not changed. A second referendum has been rejected twice by this House. But of course, when legislation goes through, once we've agreed a deal and legislation is going through for the bill that puts that in place, I'm sure there will be members of this House, because there are members who do support a second referendum, who will want to press their case during that legislation going through. I continue to believe, it's not an excuse, there isn't an issue of excuse about timing. I believe that it's important for us to deliver on the first referendum that took place in 2016 on the result of that. And can I just say to the right honourable gentleman, if he's so interested in referenda, the question is, will he now abide by the result of the 2014 Scottish referendum? Yes or no?
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, appreciate the anger that her abject surrender last night has generated across the country, having broken 100 times promises 100 times not to extend the time? She knows what I'm saying, and she's done that. Does she also accept that this withdrawal agreement undermines our democracy, the constitutional status of Northern Ireland, our right to govern ourselves, control over our laws, and undermines our national interest? Will she resign?
Can I say to my honourable friend, first of all, I do not recognise the description of the withdrawal agreement that he has put before this House. I believe we have negotiated a good deal for the United Kingdom. He references the fact that I have, he's absolutely right, on many, many occasions in this House, and he and other members of my honourable friends have been keeping count. I had said that I wanted us to leave the European Union on the 29th of March, and indeed I did. I voted for the UK to leave the European Union on the 29th of March. I wanted us to set in train that guaranteed leaving on the 22nd of May. I voted to leave on the 22nd of May. Sadly, not sufficient number of members across this House voted to leave the European Union on those dates, and hence the extension has been requested to enable us to come to a position where this House can agree on a majority on a deal that we can then deliver on leaving the European Union.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for putting the national interest above her party's interest in rejecting no deal, applying for and agreeing to an extension to Article 50. We may now have more time, but our businesses face more uncertainty. So may I encourage her during the Easter recess to take her own advice and to reflect on the decisions that need to be made and decide to put her deal to the British people so that they can decide whether they still wish to leave, now we know the actual choices that Brexit involves, or remain, so we can finally bring this crisis facing our country to a conclusion.
I say to the right honourable gentleman, as I indicated to the leader of the SNP, neither I nor the government have changed our view on the need for this House, for this Parliament, to deliver on the result of the first referendum. But can I also say to the right honourable gentleman, as I said in my statement, I think it is for all of us across this House to recognise the decisions that now face us. It is for this House to determine whether we are going to deliver Brexit for the British people. We have that opportunity. We can work together to find an agreement that will command a majority of this House, and if we do that in time, we can leave the European Union without holding the European parliamentary elections.
Dame Caroline Spellman.
Mr. Speaker, in my region already there are car factories that are in a forced shutdown because of the Brexit uncertainty. So could I thank the Prime Minister for helping us avoid a no-deal crash-out, and through her, the 27 heads of state who supported that decision. Could she elaborate a bit more on her words about creating a forum to establish our future relationship with Europe?
I thank my right honourable friend for her question. I think she's referring to references that I had made previously about the importance, as we're looking at that negotiation on a future relationship, for making sure not only that Parliament has a greater role in that process, but also that we take have wider consultations with civil society, with businesses, with trade unions. And it is the exact format of that forum has not yet been determined. But I think that will be an important element of the next stage of the process to ensure that all voices are being heard and can contribute to the debate on that future relationship.
Sir Vincent Cable.
The Prime Minister has again acknowledged that, notwithstanding her own personal objections, the House could choose to attach a referendum amendment to the withdrawal bill. Bearing in mind the constitutional advice that we shared in cross-party talks a few weeks ago, would she now ask her officials to prepare a timetable completed before the end of October in which such a hypothetical poll could be conducted if the House wills it?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he's aware of the government's position on the issue that he has raised. As I said, there are those in the House who may wish to press their case on this matter when the legislation is going through. But as I would also gently remind him, the House has already rejected that proposal of a second referendum twice.
Sir Patrick McLaughlin.
Will the Prime Minister take the opportunity again to remind the House that when the Leader of the Opposition said that he was only invited to talks at 12:05, he actually refused talks some time ago, and that would have meant that we could have moved this process on a lot quicker. Is it not the case that whatever we say, the simple fact is that the European Commission have said the only deal that's available to us is the one that the Prime Minister is recommending to the House?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right on that last point, and the question of the withdrawal agreement and it not being available to be reopened was made clear, reiterated again by the European Council, by the EU Council, in its decision of yesterday. It is the case that it is some weeks ago that I first offered the Leader of the Opposition the opportunity to talk, and we had an initial meeting. There was then not the same level of follow-up meetings and the same level of interest. What I'm pleased about is I think there is a change in the approach that is being taken. We are both sitting down seriously, looking at these issues in detail and looking at them constructively.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Speaker, up until yesterday, the EU was saying very, very clearly that it wouldn't grant an extension unless there was a credible plan, either an election, a referendum, or the prospect of getting a withdrawal agreement through soon. It wouldn't grant an extension, and if it did, there would be stringent conditions. And in fact, neither of those things were held to by the European Union, because when they were faced with the unpalatable choice of a no deal, they backed down. Will the Prime Minister learn the lesson of that? She continues to reiterate what the EU have said about the withdrawal agreement and praise her withdrawal agreement. She and the rest of the front bench voted for changes to the backstop and to the withdrawal agreement, and the Attorney-General, in his devastating critique of it, said that it hadn't changed the fundamentals of what was agreed. So can the Prime Minister please examine where she's going with all of this, learn the lessons, and come back with something that can actually get a majority in this House? And will she also, just on the issue of extensions, bear in mind that the current session of Parliament is due to end, I understand, fairly soon? There is some talk around of extending this session beyond 2 years. And can I say, Mr. Speaker, on that point, that I think many in this House, including in this bench, would regard that as something that is not acceptable.
Well, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, we have consistently sought to change the withdrawal agreement, in particular to change the backstop. He will know full well that we have argued on many occasions for a time limit or a unilateral exit clause or the replacement by alternative arrangements. Before the withdrawal agreement was originally agreed in November, the government pushed consistently for an exit clause from the backstop, but the EU did not agree to it then. After the first meaningful vote, we raised the issue again, and we sought to change the withdrawal agreement and pushed for it to be replaced by alternative arrangements. On the 11th of March, we had an exchange of letters between myself and the Presidents of the Commission and the EU Council in January. On the 11th of March, in Strasbourg, the President of the European Commission and I agreed a package, which means that the EU cannot try to trap the UK in the backstop indefinitely. It's explicitly a breach of the legally binding commitments we have agreed if they do so, and there's a legal commitment that both parties aim to replace the backstop with alternative arrangements by December 2020. But the changes at every stage, we have been working to get changes to the withdrawal agreement. The European Union has been clear now. No. Well, the right honourable gentleman says that they have backed down. Yes, I did put the case yesterday in relation to conditionality that he refers to, in relation to conditionality, and there was discussion around the table about that issue of conditionality, and the aspect that I think everybody around the table focused on is that there is only a single tier of membership of the European Union. There is only, legally, there is only a single tier of membership of the European Union, and they rejected the concept of conditionality on that basis.
Sir Oliver Hield.
The Prime Minister will recall that in the Conservative manifesto there was a commitment to negotiate a comprehensive free trade and customs agreement.
Yes.
Would she agree with me that her political declaration that has been agreed and her discussions with the Labour Party are being conducted in that spirit? And will she keep going and try to keep to the timetable that avoids the European elections? Because many of us feel it's time to get this done.
I say to my right honourable friend, we are indeed conducting those negotiations in the spirit that he has set out, and I do indeed want to achieve the timetable that he set. I think many of us across this House believe that it is important to do all we can to set in train to ensure that we can leave the European Union before the European parliamentary elections.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're in this difficult situation because the government's approach hasn't worked. And simply going round in the same circles or doing the same things isn't going to solve this either. So it would be helpful to understand how far the Prime Minister is actually prepared to reconsider her red lines. Could she tell the House whether she is now willing to consider a common external tariff with the EU, a key part of any customs union, or does she still rule a common external tariff out?
Good question. Good.
Can I say to the right honourable lady, she says, obviously, the House has rejected the government's plan. The House has also rejected the opposition's plan. The House has rejected no deal. The House has rejected revocation. The House has rejected a second referendum. So this House, at some stage, needs to come to an agreement on what it can agree on to take this issue forward. I continue, and when people talk about the custom, yes, I'm aware of the question that the right honourable lady asked. On a customs union, I think there is actually more agreement in relation to a customs union than is often given credit for when different language is used. We've been very clear that we want to obtain the benefits of a customs union, no tariffs, no rules of origin checks, and no quotas, while being able to operate our own independent trade policy. We have been very clear about this. The Labour Party has said they want a say in trade policy. The question is how we ensure that we can provide for this country to be in charge of its trade policy in the future.
John Barron.
The fact remains that we would have left the EU by now on WTO terms if the Prime Minister had not extended deadlines. The investment decisions underpinning our strong economic performance in recent years have been taken in the full knowledge that we could be leaving on WTO terms. Will the Prime Minister therefore show more confidence and commit to this House that if this Parliament does not pass a deal, we will be leaving on WTO terms, terms by which we profitably trade with many countries outside the EU.
I say to my honourable friend that I know, and he has continued to champion the concept of leaving without a deal with the European Union. I believe it is important for this country that we're able to leave in an orderly way. He references WTO terms. Of course, we trade with many countries across the world, not on WTO terms, but on the terms that are determined by the EU trade agreements with those countries. But actually, leaving without a deal is not just about our trade arrangements. It is about other issues. It is about our security as a country as well. There are other matters that a deal will cover. I continue to believe that leaving with a deal in an orderly way is in the best interests of this country, and that's what I'm pursuing.
In the midst of these important and inevitably contentious exchanges, can I ask the House to join me in warmly welcoming in the gallery today former Speaker of the New Zealand Parliament, David Carter, accompanied by Deputy Speaker of the Parliament, the Honourable Anne Tolley MP. It's a great delight to welcome you both. You come from a country that we regard as a great friend, and David, you've been a great friend to us and to me. Welcome. Kate Owe.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister not take any responsibility for the fact that she, a Conservative Unionist Prime Minister, signed up to this backstop originally without ensuring herself that she would get support in Parliament for it? Now we're in a situation where the only vote that went through this with a big majority was the Brady Amendment. Has she really done her best to ensure that we cannot get the backstop removed? It must be removed before this House will ever support her withdrawal agreement.
Can I say to the Right Honourable Lady, as I indicated earlier, we have at every stage taken this issue of the backstop. We have been arguing with the European Union in relation to this issue. We did take the Brady Amendment as a result of the decision that was taken by this House. We took that issue back into the European Union. The changes that we saw in Strasbourg, the legally binding changes that were obtained in that Strasbourg agreement in Strasbourg between myself and the President of the European Commission, were a direct result of reflecting the views of this House. This government has been clear that not only is there an accelerated timetable to determine alternative arrangements that can replace the backstop, we have actually committed to putting money into the work that will ensure that we have those alternative arrangements to replace the backstop. The Right Honourable Lady knows my view is that the backstop should never be used, it need never be used, and we need to ensure that we have the relationship in the future. That's why the future relationship is the important way of sustainably ensuring that we're meeting all our obligations, including those in relation to a border between Northern Ireland and Ireland.
Steve Baker.
Mr. Speaker, of course the government continues in office thanks to the support of our confidence and supply partners. In the event that the withdrawal agreement is pushed through unamended over the heads of those partners, will the Prime Minister be seeking the confidence of the Labour Party?
I say to my honourable friend, I recognise that in this House, reaching across the divide between the government and opposition front benches to attempt to come to an agreement on a matter is not usual practice. It is, I think, probably virtually unprecedented in the conditions in which we're doing it today. But I believe it is in the national interest for this House to deliver on the result of the referendum, for this House to deliver Brexit for the British people, and to do so in an orderly way. I have now voted 3 times to leave the European Union with a deal. I want to see this House, by a majority, voting to leave the European Union with a deal, and that's the work we're carrying on, and that's where we try to find agreement across this House.
Anna Soubry.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome this extension because it provides time for a people's vote, and I agree with the words of the Right Honourable Gentleman for Leeds Central when he says it's the only way out of the crisis and to end the uncertainty. Mr. Speaker, it won't have escaped you that a number of honourable members have heard the words of the Prime Minister when she speaks about compromise, but she still has refused or is unable to tell the House what is her compromise, what are the red lines that she set down which she now intends to rub out. Prime Minister, please answer those questions. Which of your red lines are you now prepared to rub out?
Say to the Right Honourable Lady that the whole point of sitting down and negotiating and trying to come to an agreement is that both sides are exploring where that point of agreement may be. Those are the discussions we're having. We're entering into them seriously. Rub out. I suggest that the Right Honourable Lady looks at the moves that the government has already made in a number of areas that have been requested by members across this House.
Dr. Andrew Murison.
The government, Leo Varadkar, Michel Barnier and Angela Merkel have all said that there will be no hard border, even in the event of no deal. So can we now put the idea of a Northern Ireland forever backstop out of its misery and work on mitigating an upfront customs union if a customs union is the price of Labour support for getting something approximating Brexit over the line?
Can I just say to my honourable friend that in fact, and I have obviously talked with a number of those that he has quoted in relation to this issue of a border, that the European Union has been very clear that the rules of the European Union must be applied at the border in the event that there was no deal. That is absolutely clear from the European Union, and some of the other comments have been taken out of context in the interpretation that has been given to them. On this issue of a customs union, I come back to the position I set out earlier. We want to see the benefits of a customs union. In fact, that is in the political declaration, of no tariffs, no quotas and no rules of origin checks. We also want to see, and was reflected in the political declaration, an independent trade policy. The Labour Party has a position of the benefits of a customs union with a say in trade policy. We are very clear that the benefits of a customs union can be obtained while ensuring that we have the freedom to make those trade deals around the rest of the world that we want to do as an independent country.
Ben Bradshaw.
Can I also thank the Prime Minister on behalf of my constituency in Exeter for ensuring that this country does not crash out of the European Union without a deal tomorrow, in the national interest, and I thank her for that. But does she also not recognise in the national interest that the only way out of this gridlock is to now give this decision back to the people, give them a confirmatory vote on her Brexit deal?
I have to say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, I think the way out of this gridlock is for this House to identify the deal that it can agree, that it can take forward, that it can get to, that can command a majority of this House, because I think it is for this House to deliver on the result of the referendum that took place in 2016.
Sarah Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clearly the Prime Minister has won the respect of the European Union leaders, and that's really important that we have good relations with our near neighbours and allies. It's essential for our prosperity and our security. So would I urge the Prime Minister to ignore the bullies on our backbenches and stick to your guns and deliver that Brexit, the Brexit that was in our manifesto so well described by the Leader of the House.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and can I say that we are aiming to deliver what I believe people in this country voted for, which is that Brexit that does protect jobs and livelihoods, does protect our security, does protect our union, but also ensures that we bring an end to free movement, that we're no longer under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, that we're no longer sending vast sums of money to the European Union every year. That is what we are aiming to deliver, and that is what I want to see. A deal that enables us to do that is what I want to see gaining a majority in this House.
Savile Roberts.
And I am grateful for advance sight of the statement. 27 leaders decided the UK's fate last night, while the Prime Minister waited for their decision outside. 7 of those leaders represent countries whose populations are smaller than that of Wales. Yet we're told here in Westminster that Wales is too small, too poor to have a seat at the table. Does the Prime Minister agree that Wales will be best served in a union that treats its members as equals, rather than staying in this self-harming union of inequality?
I say to the Honourable Lady that, as she knows very well, we work with the devolved administrations across the United Kingdom in taking forward the issues that are of particular concern to the various parts of the United Kingdom in determining what is the right way forward. We entered the European Union as one United Kingdom, and we will leave the European Union as one United Kingdom.
Mr. Bottomley.
Following the referendum in 2016 and the 2 major parties' policies in 2017, we have a collective responsibility to deliver. The rational, responsible, practical way forward is to take the withdrawal agreement with the majority through this House and then move on with the best possible customs arrangements that will satisfy most people, including, I believe, the majority of the people in Northern Ireland.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, he is absolutely right. I believe it is important for us to deliver on the vote of the referendum, but as he's reminded the House, of course, the 2 main parties in this chamber both campaigned in the last general election on manifestos precisely to deliver that Brexit, and that's what we should be looking to do.
Liz Kendall.
Prime Minister, we need to use this extension for a purpose. One more heave isn't good enough, and it won't work.
Absolutely right.
Neither will trying to con people that we can have all the benefits of a customs union and still have a completely independent trade policy. So can I ask her once again, does she acknowledge, even if it's not what she wants, putting her withdrawal agreement to the public is the way to break this Brexit deadlock and get the resolution our country desperately needs?
I genuinely believe that the way to break the Brexit deadlock is for this House to be able to agree on a deal that it will deliver on the vote of the British people.
Boone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At Prime Minister's questions on the 20th of March, when I asked the Prime Minister why she was seeking to extend Article 50, having promised on 108 times not to do so, she said, as Prime Minister, I could not consider a delay further beyond the 30th of June. We now, sir, have an extension up to the 31st of October. Prime Minister, how are you going to honour that commitment you gave to the House on the 20th of March?
Can I say to my honourable friend, this House and I can honour that commitment by voting for a deal that enables us to leave before the 30th of June.
Pat McFadden.
The Prime Minister has now applied for and been granted 2 extensions to the Article 50 period, and she did this to avoid the consequences of a no-deal Brexit, consequences which were laid out by the Cabinet Secretary 2 weeks ago. Rising food prices, shortages of food, stockpiling medicine, huge damage to manufacturing and the weakening of our national security. Yet for 2 years, she talked up this outcome, saying no deal is better than a bad deal. This irresponsible rhetoric has helped to normalise these consequences in the minds of the public. Does she regret talking up no deal and legitimising an outcome which she knows is bad for the country, and by the acceptance of these extensions, she is desperate to avoid?
I stand by what I have consistently said in relation to no deal being better than a bad deal, but we have a good deal. I say to the right honourable gentleman, I have voted on 3 occasions in this House for us to leave the European Union with a deal. And I think it's all members of this House who wish to deliver on leaving the European Union need to think about how we can come together and find a majority that enables us to do just that. I voted to leave with a deal. I hope the right honourable gentleman will want to vote to leave with a deal in the future too.
Julia Lopez.
Since the first defeat of the deeply flawed withdrawal agreement, the government seems to have focused on how to make all other options worse rather than how to make the agreement better. Given that this narrow strategy continues to fail and cross-party talks may not bear fruit, what assurances and outline did the Prime Minister give our EU friends on her Plan B, such that this latest extension becomes one with a purpose?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and this was a point that was made earlier about the expression that the European Union had given that they would want a purpose for any extension. I was clear with them about the approach that we are taking, the talks that we are having with the opposition, but also, as I made clear in my statement last week, that if we are not able to come to an agreement with the opposition such that there would be a proposal that would meet a majority across this House, we would move into a means of ensuring that this House was able to vote on options and come to a decision as to what its preferred option, as to what was able to get a majority across this House. And the extension is there to enable us to put that process into place.
Caroline Lucas.
Speaker, a 6-month delay is just 74 sitting days. To waste it on a Tory leadership contest would be an unforgivable act of self-indulgence, an issue that she might, for once, agree with me about. But she's wasted the last 2 years. Will she undertake not to waste one day further by supporting the immediate establishment of a House Business Committee so that we might just have a chance of have a process that is in the interests of the country rather than in the interests of the Tory party, with more votes being pulled at the last minute and more game playing?
Can I say to the honourable lady, no, I think that the arrangements that we have in relation to, obviously arrangements in relation to business of this House have been changing in recent days through decisions that have been taken by this House, but I do not believe that the establishment of a House Business Committee is the right way forward.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's first extension was based on the fact that we would ratify the withdrawal agreement, and in what was effectively MV3, we turned it down again. And now she's been given another extension longer than she asked for, yet again on the basis that we will somehow ratify the withdrawal agreement. Perseverance is a virtue, but sheer obstinacy is not. So, Prime Minister...
Hear, hear.
If, as I suspect, the Leader of the Opposition strings you along in these talks and then finds a pretext to collapse them and then throws in a confidence motion, what will you do then?
I would continue to argue for the Conservative Party remaining in government, a party that has led to a situation in this country where we see record levels of employment, 32 million people with tax cuts, a modern industrial strategy, 1.9 million more children in good and outstanding schools. We're delivering for people, and that's why this party should remain in government.
Stephen Doughty.
Extension. I welcome the ruling out of a catastrophic no deal, and I welcome the fact that there are talks going on between our two parties, because I think it is important that we try and find consensus and attempt to break the deadlock. But can I warn the Prime Minister that attempting to decouple the issue of a deal from the issue of whether that goes back to the people for their confirmation will not be acceptable to many, many people on these benches, and indeed an increasing number on her own? And will she recognise that the only way to break the deadlock will be a confirmatory vote and putting this issue back to the people?
Well, the honourable gentleman will have heard the answers I gave earlier in response to similar questions about this question of a second referendum. I do genuinely believe we gave a vote to the British people in 2016. I do genuinely believe we should be delivering on that. I think actually there is a view across this House that we should be delivering on Brexit. The question is finding an agreement across this House that enables us to do that, to get the legislation through and leave the EU.
Maggie through.
Can
my right honourable friend confirm that if we were to come together across this House and support a deal in a timely fashion after Easter, there would be every reason that we would not need to hold the European elections?
The honourable friend is right. Obviously, it's a very tight timetable, but if we were able to have an agreement that commanded a majority across this House, and obviously we have to get the legislation through, but I believe my ambition and aim would still be to be able to do that such that we do not need to hold the European parliamentary elections.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whenever the Prime Minister is asked about a second referendum, she's keen to remind us that that's been defeated twice in this House. But of course her withdrawal agreement has been defeated 3 times in this House. And on the second outing for a second referendum in this House, it got 280 votes, which is considerably better than her withdrawal agreement got on its second outing in this House. And in fact, if support for a second referendum grew at the same rate as support for her withdrawal agreement, it would win outright if it got a third vote. So, in the number of options that she intends to put to this House, if she can't get an agreement with Her Majesty's opposition, in recognition of that democratic fact, will she include a second referendum?
The honourable lady that she is again also actually talking about process here in relation to a second referendum. What this House needs to agree is the basis on which we can leave the European Union. And that is it is the substance of that is the nature of the discussions that we are having with the opposition.
Damien Green.
Many in this place, but more importantly, many exporting businesses and farmers will welcome the fact that they are no longer facing tariffs that would threaten their survival, which would have happened if we crashed out with no deal tomorrow night. So, to that extent, the Council conclusions are very welcome. But can my right honourable friend the Prime Minister agree with me that, contrary to many of the voices from opposition benches, a second referendum wouldn't be the end of the process, it would be the start of the process, and in the current climate it would be much more likely to lead to greater division in this country rather than the healing that we desperately need?
Can I say to my right honourable friend, I think he is absolutely right. I am concerned that a second referendum would increase division in our society, increase division across this country, just at the time when we do need to be bringing people together. We can bring people together by agreeing the way in which we can leave the European Union, getting on with it and delivering for people on their vote.
Peter Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following on from the right honourable member for Ashford's question, it seems that our body politic is increasingly fearful of the electorate. We are held hostage to the 2016 referendum and other public ballots. And isn't it true that the tone and conduct of us as politicians and her as a leader of our country is increasingly important, and as important as the policies themselves? Is now not the time that we sit back and we reflect and we start to investigate how we can use public ballots to bring people together as a country, not run away scared of public ballots, and how we can understand how we can actually lead through elections with rigour and focus on fact rather than division itself?
I recognise the passion and seriousness with which the honourable gentleman has campaigned and championed the concept of second referendum in this House and elsewhere. I simply say to him, nobody is running scared of the electorate. We gave the electorate the opportunity to determine the fate of this country in relation to its membership of the European Union, and they made a decision on that. They made a decision that we should leave the European Union. So I think that, in fact, there would be many people, if we were to go back to the people in a second referendum, there would be many people who would fear that that was actually a sign of bad faith in relation to their politicians, and I think could damage our democracy.
Richard Harrington.
Speaker, I'd like to thank my right honourable friend the Prime Minister for all of her efforts that have taken place to remove the nonsense of no deal from this agenda. In her statement she mentioned that if the talks fall, which I certainly hope is not the case, that she'll put to the House a series of votes to determine which course to pursue. Could she confirm to me that there will be a voting system of preference which allows the House to finally decide on one solution to this problem?
What I have said and what is the intention of the government is that if the talks with the opposition fail to find a point of agreement between us that we believe will get a majority across this House, we would work with the opposition to identify options and votes that will be put to this House to find a way of determining a single result. There are a number of ways in which it is possible to do that. I think what would be important would be ensuring that whatever system was chosen, were we in that position, whatever voting system was chosen, was genuinely going to come to a proper reflection of the views of this House.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister knows that full membership of the single market is the only way we can guarantee workers' rights, guarantee the integrity of the union, do something for the services sector, which is 80% of the economy. A standalone customs union simply doesn't cut it. So in these options that will be presented to us if the talks don't work, can she guarantee that full membership of the single market through the European Economic Area will be an option that will be on offer amongst those options?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that I don't recognise the picture that he has painted in relation to these matters. It is not the case that full membership of the single market is the only way to achieve the benefits that he has referred to. It's particularly important as we leave the European Union that we have a care for our services sector. He's right, given the significant extent to which that plays a role in our economy, but actually that flexibility and maintaining and recognising the importance of the City of London, particularly in financial services, and the risk that is borne here in the United Kingdom leads us to want to see that greater flexibility in relation to services. And on workers' rights, can I say to him, it is not the case that the only way to ensure that we maintain and enhance workers' rights in the United Kingdom is through full membership of the single market. This is a government that is enhancing workers' rights. It's doing that because we believe that's what's right here in the United Kingdom.
Sir Nicholas Soames.
Speaker, will my right honourable friend agree with me that there are actually many other very important issues facing the European Union, including, for the moment, the United Kingdom, particularly in respect of the European Union's crucial relationship with China? And will she confirm that, given the extension granted by our European partners, that she will direct Britain's negotiators to use this extra valuable time creatively in relation to trade with China, which inevitably, when we have left the European Union, will be much harder to negotiate?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend, he is absolutely right, of course, that there are a number of other issues facing the European Union, including its relationship with China. He will be aware of the benefits that we already have as a United Kingdom from investment from China and the interaction of trade that we have with China, and we will, of course, want to enhance that for the future. As a member of the European Union, during this extension, we will continue to participate and continue to operate with that duty of sincere cooperation and fulfil all our rights and obligations.
Chukaramuna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has wasted most of the last 2 years negotiating Brexit with her own divided party, when what she actually needs to do is rub out her red lines to bring this House and our country together. The problem is she always puts her party before country. So will she now commit to stopping flogging her dead horse of a deal, face down the hardliners in her own party, and give serious consideration to a people's vote, which her own Chancellor has said is a perfectly credible proposition?
For the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave earlier.
George Freeman.
Would my right honourable friend agree with me as a former business minister that the businesses of this country, on whom we all rely, deserve better than this ongoing crisis and chaos, and need the certainty that could be delivered if every member of this House respected the referendum and in their constituency a vote to leave and voted for it? And could she tell me what to tell voters on the doorsteps on May the 2nd when my hard-working local councillors risk being thrown out after 4 years of really good work on our behalf for something they are not responsible for?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right about the importance of us finding a way through in this House to deliver on Brexit and to ensure that we do that in an orderly way. And I would say to my honourable friend that on those doorsteps, I think what he should be saying to voters is, first of all, that this is a government which has been working to deliver Brexit and which continues to work to deliver Brexit. But when it comes to the local council elections, people should, I'm sure, recognise that if they actually want good local services and they want lower council tax, then there is only one way to vote, and that is vote Conservative.
Smith.
Mr. Speaker, may I commend the Prime Minister for the flexibility that she's shown in recent days in rejecting no deal and requesting the extension to Article 50 that she'd previously rejected. And may I ask that she shows a similar spirit of compromise in accepting that one way in which she can get her deal through this Parliament is if she attaches to it a people's vote.
Can I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave earlier?
As well as the Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I also support the Prime Minister's efforts at continuing to seek a resolution to the problem that she has, share her concerns about being where we are, but also express concern that the next time we seek an extension, it may not be there. In order to avoid the dramatic consequences of that, will she, in addition to pursuing the withdrawal agreement, as she rightly should, be as flexible as possible in relation to the alternatives? And if she is to get a true reflection of the House's view, allow free votes on those alternatives to ensure that we can get an agreement over the line, leave the EU and have the future relationship with the EU that we want?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend, I think this is a first opportunity I have to be able to thank him for all the work that he has done as a minister over the years. And can I also say to him that we will, of course, we are working, as I said, to see if we can find that point of agreement with the opposition that would command a majority across this House. If we're not able to do that, we will want to agree the way in which we can take votes forward such that we do identify an opinion across this House which will command a majority and enable us to do, as my right honourable friend has said, which is to leave the European Union, to do that in an orderly way, to do that in a way that is good for the UK.
Sammy Wilson.
In these negotiations, the EU demanded £39 billion and got it, an unnecessary Irish backstop and got it, a withdrawal agreement which will tie our hands in future negotiations and got it, and extensions which were against the commitments given by the Prime Minister and got it. Can she give us any example of any demand by the EU which she actually resisted?
Well, I can give plenty of examples of that, and I'll give the honourable gentleman just two. A Northern Ireland-only customs territory in the backstop, which we resisted, to make sure it was a UK-wide customs territory. And he said the EU demanded £39 billion. No, they didn't. They started off at £100 billion, and it was our negotiations that got it down.
Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Most members of this House will have at the forefront of their minds the issue of citizens' rights. And whilst I welcome the Prime Minister's pledge to respect the rights of EU nationals here and the reciprocal rights that some Member States have given, in the absence of a withdrawal agreement, those rights are not underpinned by international law. Can I ask the Prime Minister if she can help arrange a meeting between me and the British in Europe, who represent over 1 million British citizens in Europe, and the 3 million with the Secretary of State for DEX-EU to discuss these issues?
My honourable friend, he has resolutely championed the cause of EU citizens here in the UK and also UK citizens living in the European Union. And we welcome the contribution that EU citizens have made here in the United Kingdom. That's why we have given our guarantees to protect their rights and are working with the EU27, who have, to various levels, guaranteed the rights of UK citizens in living in their countries, and we continue to work to ensure that we have those reciprocal rights. But my honourable friend has raised an issue which is of importance, and I'm very happy to ensure that he and those representatives are able to meet the Secretary of State to discuss these issues.
Aaron Buck.
The Prime Minister has referred to the withdrawal agreement implementation bill, which I assume we can assume is ready to go. Can she tell the House how the government intends to judge when and whether it will be in a position to bring forward that bill?
Well, I think one of the first points that I would make to the Honourable Lady is, of course, that crucially we will see how the talks with the opposition progress. As I said, there were further talks taking place today. These talks have been conducted in a positive and constructive manner. I look forward to them continuing to be conducted in that manner. And obviously, if we are able to meet a point of agreement with the opposition in relation to the way forward, then that is what we will seek to bring to this House.
Mr. David Jones.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has spoken of the need for compromise. So will she undertake that in the additional 6 months or so that we've been allotted as a consequence of the Article 50 extension, she will seek to persuade the European Union of the need to compromise on the issue of the Irish backstop and show less obduracy? And will she explain to them that for so long as the Irish backstop remains unamended, it is extremely unlikely that the withdrawal agreement will be approved by this House?
Can I say to my right honourable friend, as I enunciated earlier, we have been over the last, not just the last few months, but indeed in advance of the withdrawal agreement being agreed in November, been pressing the issue of the Irish backstop. As my right honourable friend knows, changes have been made. Legally binding changes were obtained in the agreement between myself and President Juncker at Strasbourg in early March. Those changes were, of course, brought to this House. The House then continued to reject the withdrawal agreement. What we are now doing is finding a way through that ensures that the deal that we have agreed with the European Union can find a majority in this House. And once again, the European Union has been clear that the withdrawal agreement is not open for renegotiation.
Mrs. Helen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 6 largest manufacturers and the National Farmers Union in my constituency all pressed to take no deal off the table, and I'm extremely glad that that has happened. When the Prime Minister next looks at the opposition's proposal for a permanent customs union, will she bear in mind the example of Turkey, which is in a customs union but also has its own separate trade deals with third countries?
I can assure the Honourable Lady that people have spoken to me both positively and negatively about the Turkish example in relation to a customs union, because in practice Turkey does not find itself able to have that freedom in relation to their trade deals because of the arrangements that they have with the European Union.
Bill Grant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have AGA, a timber processing plant in my constituency, and for the first time in 20 years it is maxed out in storage and at great expense secured additional product storage, all due to Brexit uncertainty. Will my right honourable friend recognise these costs can't be borne indefinitely, and we collectively as a Parliament need to get the Brexit deal done to bring certainty to all our businesses?
Can I thank my honourable friend for bringing home in a very real way the impact that the uncertainty is having on businesses across this country. I do want to bring an end to that uncertainty. I want to do that as soon as possible. We can only do that if this House is able to come together and find a majority for a deal that enables us to leave.
Deirdre Brock.
Mr. Speaker, Guy Verhofstadt said it is a simple fact there is no big obstacle to an independent Scotland rejoining the EU. Yet the PM said yesterday independence would mean Scotland being thrown out of the EU, and indeed that's what the people of Scotland were told time and time again in the run-up to the independence referendum. Will she retract the ridiculous assertion that Scotland will somehow uniquely not be allowed to join the EU, despite potentially being one of its richest member states?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, I think she just needs to recall the statements that were clearly made by the European Union at the time of the issue when Scottish independence was being considered in terms of the referendum. And the point is very simple. The SNP at the time was saying that Scotland, if it voted for independence, could just carry on being a member of the European Union. What the EU was very clear that Scotland would have to apply to become a member of the European Union, and that was very clear at the time of independence. And that was said clearly by the European Union.
Antoinette Sandbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents welcome the fact that the Prime Minister is trying to work cross-party to secure a final resolution to Brexit. Can I ask her, when considering her red lines, to look at the evidence of the Comres poll that was conducted immediately after the referendum vote that indicated only 35% of those voting Leave believed that they were voting to leave the single market or the customs union? And will she do a value for money assessment on our confidence and supply partners, where they are both undermining confidence in the UK and failing to supply votes?
I say to my
Minister.
I can just say to my honourable friend, I think that when people voted across the United Kingdom to leave the European Union, obviously individuals voted for different reasons, but I think underlying the vote was that desire to ensure that the United Kingdom, as an independent nation, could make decisions for itself in a number of areas where it was previously not making those decisions. What we want to see, I think collectively across this House, what people want to see is, outside the European Union, us continuing to have a good trading relationship with the European Union. I think that deep and a special partnership that we have spoken about is important for us for the future to have with our nearest neighbours, and that's what we're pursuing.
Lady Herman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, today when the cross-party talks resume with the Labour Party, may I suggest that the Labour leader is firmly reminded that he cannot pick and choose the days on which he stands up and defends the Good Friday Agreement. He, yesterday at Prime Minister's questions, was quite happy to stand up, and quite rightly. He stood up and defended the Good Friday Belfast Agreement to mark the 21st anniversary of the signing of that agreement. He described it as a great achievement by the then Labour Party, and it was. It brought peace, which we cherish in Northern Ireland and right across the United Kingdom. But the Leader of the Opposition must stand up every day and defend the Good Friday Agreement.
Order. Sorry, can I just very gently say to the Honourable Lady that questions to the Prime Minister about matters for which she is responsible. The Prime Minister is not responsible for what the Leader of the Opposition does or doesn't say, and we've got a lot to get through, so we need it in a sentence. Lady Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So in the cross-party talks today, may I urge the Prime Minister to remind the Leader of the Opposition that the Good Friday Agreement and the protection of the constitutional position of Northern Ireland and the consent principle are guaranteed by her Brexit deal, and it is therefore something that the Labour Party should support.
The Honourable Lady makes a very important point. The Brexit deal does defend the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. We are very clear that we retain will continue to meet the commitments that we as the United Kingdom Government have in relation to that agreement. That is recognised on all sides, and that is part of we've made those statements clearly within the deal that we've negotiated with the European Union, and I believe another reason why it should be supported.
Chris Heaton-Harris.
Thank you. How difficult is it to negotiate with our EU partners now when actions taken by this Parliament and in advice given to her in number 10 mean that my right honourable friend has no choice but to take whatever she is given by our European partners?
Minister.
Can I first of all, I think this is also my first opportunity to thank my honourable friend for the work that he has done. The fact that we have made the preparations we have for no deal are largely down to the work that my honourable friend has done as the Minister responsible for that in DEXU during his time there. Of course, this House earlier this week did vote to require an extension to be requested from the European Union. It also maintained the prerogative power for the government to enter into international agreements and to have that flexibility. Of course, the House has made known its view on a number of issues. What it has not so far been able to do is actually come to an agreement on the withdrawal agreement and a deal such that we can move forward and leave the European Union.
Ms. Bryant.
It's good, of course, that the front benches are talking to one another, but the trouble is that this Parliament isn't quite as simple as that. We've had more members resign from their political parties than any other parliament in history. We've had more members resign from their post on government side and opposition side than in any other parliament in history. So the truth is we are going to have to go on to the next stage fairly quickly. I would just urge the Prime Minister to do that. And can she just answer the question that the Leader of the DUP answered earlier about whether it is her intention to keep this parliamentary session going all the way through to October the 31st? that still gives enormous amounts of power to the government. I think it will be a wholly retrograde step.
My focus in relation to parliamentary time at the moment is to seeing if we can find an agreement that enables us to do what is necessary here in Parliament to get a withdrawal agreement ratified by this Parliament such that we can leave the European Union.
Jonathan Ginogly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for going up to Brussels, standing up in the national interest, and coming back with an extension that means we're going to avoid the car crash and disaster that would have been involved in a hard Brexit. I commend her for opening negotiations with the opposition. Will there be a timetable or a structure to those negotiations? Will we come back after Easter knowing what the process is going to be, which will, I think, give satisfaction to honourable members and give us an idea of where we're getting to and the alternatives for other Plan Bs if necessary?
Yeah. No, my honourable friend raises an important point. Obviously, as we go through the discussions that we're having with the opposition, the nature of those discussions and how those are progressing in itself determines the timetable. But I'm very clear that if we were to meet the desire, which I have certainly, of not fighting European or not holding European parliamentary elections, then of course there is a timetable that needs to be watched and adhered to. But so soon we will need to make that decision. But with the constructive talks as they are at the moment, I think it is absolutely right we continue those talks to see if we can find that point of agreement between us.
Barry Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, can I say to the Prime Minister that many of us watching her working very hard and diligently believe she has been, in her own way, pursuing the national interest, and we thank her for it. But could I also say that I always have welcomed it when she reaches out across the party in the national interest to get this sorted. But can I give her a good news? I've been in this House nearly 40 years in May, and I have a good feel for that. I feel there's a much more optimistic spirit here now, since we've got this delay, that across the parties we can get more goodwill and we can get this sorted. Can we really do that? Look, cast aside some of the red lines, yes, and all that stuff. Come into the room in a positive spirit, and we on the back benches will support this leadership and her leadership if it gets this sorted in the national interest.
Well, can I thank the gentleman for the optimism that he has shown and for his references to the positive mood in the House. I hope that we will indeed be able to do what he suggests and find a way through, because I think what the public want is exactly what he said. They want us to get this sorted.
Victoria Prentice.
Brenda from Bristol's views are definitely echoed by Beryl of Banbury. The last thing we want are European elections. Can I ask the Prime Minister to do everything she can, even though she has managed to achieve a longer extension now, to make sure that we are able to do this as quickly as possible and leave the EU, as my constituents voted to do some nearly 3 years ago?
Yes, can I say to my honourable friend, getting the terminability of the extension was very important for us. That does mean it is in our hands. We can leave earlier, we can leave at a timescale that means that we don't have to hold that European parliamentary election, and we can deliver for her constituents and constituents up and down the country.
Mr. Streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has asked this House now several times to vote for her deal. The fact is, if she agreed to put it to a confirmatory vote, it would sail through. Is the reason she doesn't want to do so because she thinks it won't achieve a majority? And if so, wouldn't that be thoroughly undemocratic? And if she genuinely believes it delivers the will of the people, then why won't she ask them?
Prime Minister.
To the honourable gentleman, no, it is not because I'm concerned about what the result of that such a vote would be. It is because I believe that, having given the decision to the British people as to whether we should leave the European Union, it is right and it is duty for this House to actually deliver on that.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Isn't it abundantly clear that anyone who believes that a second referendum will bring the nation together was on another planet during the last one?
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend makes a very important point. A second referendum, I believe, would be divisive rather than healing.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. The deal will require the ratification by the EU Parliament. The current Parliament sits for the last time a week today and then meets just once in July to sort itself out and doesn't really meet properly until October, November. So isn't this discussion of a sooner leaving date actually an impossibility because it can't be ratified?
Prime Minister.
No, it's not an impossibility because it is possible for the European Parliament to ratify in advance of the United Kingdom ratifying.
David Tredinnick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't hear you. As a long-term supporter of my right honourable friend's deal, and I congratulate her on coming back from Europe with an extension that has not got onerous conditions, which we were all told would be imposed. May I also say to her, speaking for the businesses in the Midlands, time is of the essence. Businesses are not getting the bank loans they're supposed to have. They're going out of business. And I also say to her, with reference to the opposition, that it's the opposition that are being blamed for their intransigence and sheer bloody-mindedness in this matter.
I say to my honourable friend, in relation to businesses, I think he's absolutely right, and time is of the essence. It is important that we bring the uncertainty that businesses are facing to a conclusion, and that's why I think it is absolutely right that we do everything we can to find a way through a majority in this House that delivers on Brexit and does it in an orderly way and gives certainty to those businesses.
Mary Cray.
President Tusk urged her to use the time well, and her EU counterparts have urged a duty of sincere cooperation upon her. I had hoped that that duty would extend to the cross-party talks, but listening to her replies in this place today, I'm filled with a growing dismay that she has failed to understand that the Labour Party's negotiating mandate has been set out by our members in our party conference that says any deal needs to be put back to the people for a confirmatory ballot with an option to remain. And I can tell her now that those talks will not succeed unless she hardwires it in to the withdrawal agreement bill. She simply won't get a stable majority for that bill in this place.
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the honourable lady that we, both sides, both government and opposition, are approaching these talks with the aim of constructively looking to see if we can find a way through this that will command a majority in this House, that will enable us to get the legislation through and do what but she and other honourable members on that side of the House and honourable and right honourable members on this side of the House did at the last general election, which is stood on a manifesto to deliver Brexit.
And Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend in her statement spoke of the British people being frustrated with the present situation. I can certainly confirm that that applies to my constituents, but they're also angry and they feel that our country has been humiliated. Can the Prime Minister give them at least a crumb of comfort by giving them an absolute assurance that there will most certainly never ever be another application for an extension? And would she agree that the one benefit from the extension is that it gives us even more time to prepare for no deal?
Can I say to my honourable friend, can I first of all thank him for the support that he has recently shown for the deal, because the best way that we can give that confidence to his constituents is by ensuring that in this House we agree a deal and then we're able actually to deliver the leaving of the European Union.
Geraint Davis.
Mr. Speaker, you said a moment ago that the European Parliament can vote to ratify the deal before this Parliament, and presumably during that interlude there will be further negotiations to change the political declaration. So can she tell me how she intends to entrench any agreements in good faith between the two parties in the political declaration, if not by a public confirmatory vote which will make those political declarations sustainable rather than ripped up by a future leader?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that we have already indicated the intention that we have to ensure that Parliament has a greater role in the negotiations in relation to the future relationship in future by accepting, as we said on the 29th of March, the amendment in the name of his honourable friend, the member for Stoke-on-Trent Central. And we can also look at the elements elements of this are about the political declaration. There are also elements that are about what we do here in this House, in UK legislation, to ensure that we're entrenching objectives for that future relationship. Of course, the negotiation still has to take place with the EU on that future relationship, but there are many steps that we can take here in the United Kingdom to give confidence to members of this House.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's resolve, especially with her lack of sleep, in trying to persuade this House to come up with a solution that is acceptable to our Brexit problem, is to be highly commended. In return, will she continue to resolve to press our European partners for the only thing that's had a majority in this House, namely the Brady Amendment combined with the Malthouse Compromise?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend that the position in relation to the withdrawal agreement has been reiterated by the European Union Council. But of course, the point of the Brady Amendment was that alternative arrangements should be in place that could replace the backstop. We are, and one of the things that we have agreed with the European Union is a timetable for work on those alternative arrangements. And as I indicated earlier in response to a question, the government has committed money, funding for the work that is necessary to ensure that we will be in that position, such that at the end of December 2020 the backstop would not need to be used, and if interim arrangements were necessary, those alternative arrangements would be available.
Patrick Grady.
Speaker, the 78% of my constituents who voted Remain don't want an extension. They just want this business stopped. The way to break this deadlock is either with a new referendum, a new House of Commons, or a new Prime Minister. So which is it going to be?
Prime Minister.
I say to the honourable gentleman, he knows full well that I believe it is the duty of this House, I believe it is the duty of this Parliament to deliver on the result of the referendum that took place in 2016, to do that with a deal, to leave the European Union in an orderly way, and that's what we're working to do.
Charles Vara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This House very much appreciates the Prime Minister's desire to leave with a deal. However, the Prime Minister will appreciate that a responsible government must prepare for all eventualities. There are members in this House who do not favour a no-deal scenario because they feel that the country is not ready to leave in such circumstances. Given that we are now in an extended territory in terms of leaving the EU, would the Prime Minister kindly give an assurance to the House that she has given instructions to the government to prepare for a no-deal in the event that we do reach that eventuality, and I hope that she will also appreciate that by doing so, it will not only strengthen our position as far as the EU is concerned with further negotiations, but also if we do have to leave on a no-deal basis, we can do so with confidence and without fear.
I say to my right honourable friend that it is right, as we have not yet agreed a deal on the basis on which we are leaving the European Union, that we continue to make preparations for all eventualities. But I will also say this to my right honourable friend, that in a no-deal situation, it wouldn't simply be a question of what the United Kingdom government had done. It would be a question of what governments in the European Union, other governments in the European Union had done. So while any preparations would be made to mitigate the impact of no deal, of course there would be elements that will be out with the control of the UK government.
Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister can be relieved I'm not going to ask to dip into her stash of cough sweets. But I do want to follow up on something she just said to the member for Meriden about one of the things that she wants to do with the time now available to her, which is to hear what businesses and the public think about all the things in front of us. Does she recognise that the fairest, most inclusive and most democratic way to do that would be to learn from other countries and have a citizens' assembly?
Well, can I thank the honourable lady for her question, particularly given the state of her throat and voice. But I think we are obviously looking at establishing, as we have indicated, a more, if you like, a more formal forum, which it is possible to bring people together across. We have been listening to business, of course. We have been talking and listening to trade unions and civil society, but a more formal way of doing that, and arrangements for that will be set out in due course.
Paul Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister accept the very clear message I got from my fellow commuters from Chislehurst this morning, who I think are very representative of my constituency, that she has done the right thing by the country in avoiding a no deal, which would have done real harm to their real-world jobs and businesses. Also, that it is no harm, in fact a good thing, in the real world to seek compromise and to reach out, and that rigidity and fundamentalism is actually what does not work in the real world. And thirdly, that they want her to have our support in continuing to see this through and have the matter done.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his, and thank the commuters from Chislehurst for their comments that they have brought into the House. It's absolutely right. I think people recognise the importance of compromise. They recognise the importance of working this through, finding a solution and getting it done.
Sure, the commuters of Chislehurst were greatly encouraged to be accompanied on their journey by the honourable and learned gentleman. I feel sure of that. Seema Malhotra.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, 3 years after the referendum, is finally engaged in cross-party talks. But she may recall, as long ago as the week that she took office, I wrote her calling for cross-party working in the national interest and for her to urgently engage the country through a national convention on how we move forward. So with committed Brexiteers now, like Peter Oborne, expressing concern about where we have reached and the risks of Brexit for our economy and our union, who does she plan to engage in the more formal forum she has described in order to engage the public in how we move forward and use the next 6 months wisely to bring our divided country together?
We do want to bring our divided country together. First of all, in order to do that, we need to have agreement across this House for a deal that can ensure that we can deliver Brexit and then move on to that second stage where we will indeed be having that commitment, both in terms of the responsibilities and involvement of this House, but also of businesses, trade unions and civil society.
Richard Graham.
Given the collective failure of Parliament to secure the withdrawal agreement bill and allow us to leave the European Union so far, the Prime Minister is absolutely right to seek cross-party consensus, secure an extension of Article 50 and urge us to resolution of this as quickly as possible to avoid the European Union elections. In that process, the wording of customs arrangements in the future political declaration is likely to be key, and I've asked the chairman of our Select Committee for Leaving the EU to distribute a briefing on this. But could my right honourable friend also organise for leading representatives of major business organisations to brief members across the House on the importance of the withdrawal agreement bill and what their views on the customs union are?
My honourable friend has made a very interesting and important suggestion. I will certainly look very carefully at that. I think it is important that members of this House have as much information as possible when they are making decisions on these matters, and certainly the voice of business will be an important part of that.
Dr. Reba Hack.
Mr. Speaker, I must thank the Prime Minister for having me round for much more agreeable cross-party dialogue exactly a week ago, it feels like 6 months ago, than the exchanges that we have the forcibly confrontational exchanges that we have in here. And I congratulate her on her achievement of the wee hours yesterday night or this morning, whenever that was. In recognition of the spirit of reaching consensus that she talked about, and we discussed last week how all our constituents just want this stalemate moved on from, I'm now prepared to allow her deal to pass, subject to the small rider that it has attached to the end of it, a ratificatory referendum to check in that the will of the people in 2016 is the will of the people now. And I feel that would imbue it with democratic renewal. That is my compromise, Mr. Speaker. It's a big climb down from what I've said all the way up to now. I just wondered if she'd tell us what is hers.
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, and I was happy to have a discussion with her last week, and can I just say to her, I think in her question to me, she referenced the need that constituents feel to be able to move on from this situation. Can I just say to her gently that I don't think holding a second referendum would enable people to move on. It would have further discussion, further division.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for all that she's done over the last weeks, days and months, and for what she achieved yesterday. Would she also join me in thanking Sir Tim Barrow, the UK's representative to the European Union, and his staff, and indeed many of the fellow leaders at the European Council who showed great goodwill towards the United Kingdom in coming to this agreement and listening to the points that she made. They are our partners for the future, whatever that holds.
Can I say to my my honourable friend, I'm very happy to congratulate and welcome Sir Tim Barrow and all his staff on all the work that they have done. They've been putting long hours in on behalf of the United Kingdom and made a really important contribution to the work that we've been doing with the EU in negotiating this particular deal. And can I also say that he's absolutely right. Those EU leaders were willing to come. Some broke off election campaigning. One restricted a trip that he was due to make to Vietnam in order to come round the table to get that agreement yesterday, and I was grateful to them for that. They are our partners. They will continue to be our partners.
On break.
When 2 years ago the Prime Minister was devising a Brexit that reflected the will of the people, I assume it didn't include many elements of Labour policy. So if the Prime Minister agrees a blue-red Brexit with the Leader of the Opposition, it cannot, by definition, reflect her interpretation of the will of the people. Doesn't that make the case for a people's vote unassailable?
The Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, I think there are actually many things and plenty of things on which we agree with the opposition on this matter: ending free movement, protecting jobs, upholding and enhancing workers' rights. These are all things that we agree on. So there is much that we do agree on. We're working to see how we can come to a final agreement between us that would get a majority across this House.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 10 years ago, European elections were held in the heat of the expenses scandal, and many voters chose to stay at home. 2 members of the British National Party were sent to represent our country, despite the fact that less than 3% of voters actually voted for them, and despite the abhorrent policies of that party, which denied membership to anyone whose face was not white. So can I urge my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and the Leader of the Opposition to do everything they can to resolve this impasse so that we don't need to fight European elections, but if we do, to fight them with a positive attitude from the centre and not to hand a platform to extremists again.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very important point, and I think I do believe, and I would hope that this is a view that is shared across the House, that we should be working to try to ensure that we do not need to hold those European parliamentary elections, that we are able to get an agreement that can see a majority across this House so that we can leave and not hold those elections. And I think it is very important, as she says, that we do not see platforms being given to extremists.
Dr. Paul Williams.
Mr. Speaker, when there are problems in a relationship, we encourage couples to keep on talking. When there's an industrial dispute, negotiations are always best. When there's a dispute between countries, we encourage people to talk. Why does the Prime Minister think that having a binding public confirmatory vote would be so divisive?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, first of all, can I say his exemplification of when there are issues of which people disagree, the ability to come together and talk is an important element, which is exactly what I'm doing with the opposition at the moment. But as I've said before, I think that one of the reasons why I think that a second referendum would be divisive is because I think there are many people who felt that they voted for a conclusion in the first referendum and would feel that they would lose their trust in politicians if we failed to deliver on that.
Matt Warman.
76% of my constituents voted to leave the European Union, and every day this Parliament fails to deliver on that is another day that their faith in democracy is diminished. So can I say to the Prime Minister that this is about more than Brexit, and that a second referendum would be a hammer blow to that faith in democracy, and we cannot let that happen?
No, my honourable friend speaks powerfully on this issue, and as I have indicated in answer to a number of questions, I believe we do have a duty in this House to deliver on the vote of the British people, to deliver Brexit for them.
Kevin Ollenreich.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In last week's indicative votes, the opposition front bench moved one of their key red lines and supported a solution that does not include a permanent customs union, but instead includes a customs arrangement. Now that we're virtually on the same page, isn't now the time to put party politics aside and work cross-party to agree a deal in the national interest?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I think it is that the public expect no less of us that at a time such as this, when there has been this deadlock, that we are willing to work together, politicians are willing to sit down and talk together and find a solution, and that's exactly what we want to do.
Rachel Masson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To date, the Prime Minister has failed to move on her red lines, so has not, in sincerity, reached out across this Parliament, let alone this country. Parliament, our nation is stressed, it's hurting, it's dividing and it's breaking. So how will the Prime Minister use the time available to her to bring our country together and heal the divides in our nation? And will she work across the House to do this?
Sure. Can I say to the Honourable Lady, that is exactly what we are doing. We are having talks in a very positive, constructive atmosphere, looking in detail. Of course, we've both started, as I say, I think there's a lot that we agree on. There are some differences between us, but we're working to find, if we can find agreement between these. The Honourable Lady talks about the country and bringing the country together. I think a first step in bringing the country together is being able to bring this House together to find a deal so that we can deliver Brexit.
Mike Wood.
Speaker, my right honourable friend is aware of my view of a lengthy extension, but the extension period that she's negotiated ends if an agreement is ratified. What guarantees has she secured that the European Parliament will ratify any agreement in a timely manner without unnecessary delay?
It is clear what has been agreed, as I understand it, is that there is a process by which the European Parliament, as I indicated earlier, would be able to ratify prior to the United Kingdom ratifying. Of course, that ratification could be subject to us then ratifying to enable that the whole process had been completed.
Clive Efford.
Mr. Speaker, given that the Prime Minister seems to have indicated quite clearly that she's not prepared to give at all on her red lines, and she said in her statement that if we can't come to cross-party agreement, that she wants to bring back soon, so I'd like to know how long is soon, a small number of options before the House. What will be included in those options?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, first of all, I have indicated on a number of occasions now that we are working constructively and positively with the opposition to find that point of agreement between us. As I've said, there are many issues. People often talk, for example, on customs about disagreement between us. Actually, we do agree that we want the benefits of a customs union with no tariffs, no rules of origin checks and no quotas. And he referenced the potential second stage if it is not possible to come to that agreement. We would be working with the opposition to identify those options and how to take those forward.
Derek Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People want and expect us to get on with the job, and I believe that trust in our democratic system is being eroded at an alarming rate. Assuming that the Prime Minister can get the meaningful vote for part approved, is it still the PM's view, the Prime Minister's view, that the transition period will end at the end of 2020? If it was that view, then this would demonstrate that we are true to our word.
It is certainly my view that that transition period can end at the end of December 2020, and indeed we should work to ensure that it does end at the end of December 2020. And of course, the sooner we can get a deal ratified through this Parliament, then the more likely we are to be able to meet that timetable.
Dr. Lisa Cameron.
Many thanks, Mr. Speaker. As Easter approaches, my churches across East Kilbride, Straven and Lesmahago have expressed grave concern regarding growing intolerance towards EU citizens in the UK as a result of the Brexit discord and extreme right-wing views. So what more can the Prime Minister do to denounce this intolerance, to reassure our EU citizens that they are valued? We want their contribution because they improve our society for the better.
Well, I'm very happy to echo that comment that the Honourable Lady has made. EU citizens make a valuable contribution to our society and to our economy. We are the better for their contribution, the contribution that they make. That is why the Government has been clear in guaranteeing and protecting the rights of those EU citizens. We are one community and we should move forward as one community.
Raymond Chishti.
Mr. Speaker, paragraph 10 of the conclusion says further extension cannot be allowed to undermine the regular functioning of the institutions. Prime Minister, that is exactly what would happen if we have the European elections take place. We would get far-right extremist individuals who were protesting outside number 10 on the 29th of March, exploiting people's grievances for their own interest. Sitting on the Home Affairs Select Committee, Prime Minister, and you know this well, over 100 live investigations take place on extremism, and most of them are far-right extremists. Taking part in those European elections would give legitimacy to some of these vile individuals and their beliefs. Prime Minister, my constituents say, please deliver by the 22nd. We don't take part in European elections. If not, this has gone on long enough. Deliver on the democratic mandate which the people have voted on and leave without a deal.
I say to my honourable friend, I absolutely agree that we should be working to ensure that we can leave the European Union with a deal without having to hold those European parliamentary elections.
Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sad to say that no matter how the Prime Minister dresses up last night as a bilateral negotiation, it was actually a humiliation for this country on her watch. And I wondered, in the spirit of saying that she wants to compromise, can she just confirm for me and the many of my constituents who've been in touch about whether she is actually going to move off any of those red lines that she's put forward?
Prime Minister.
To the honourable lady, we have already shown our willingness to move when issues have been put to us as a government. We've done that on some of the issues, for example, around workers' rights. These are still issues that may wish to be discussed with us, but we've already shown our willingness to move on issues.
Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I compliment the Prime Minister on her stamina? And can I thank her for making the future of the Union paramount in her considerations? The last thing we need in Scotland is another divisive referendum. And I know that the people of Stirling want us to come together and resolve this issue. They want us to compromise. They want us to be grown up about this. Does the Prime Minister agree with this sentiment from Liz Cameron, the Chief Executive of the Scottish Chambers of Commerce? She said it would be a disgrace if any of those who claim to represent our citizens, if, come the 31st of October, the same late-night drama plays out all over again.
Minister. My honourable friend is absolutely right. I think the responsibility for all of us on this House now is to come together to find a way through to ensure that we can get this done.
And Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has repeatedly set her face against a second referendum, but she has also said compromise will be required and that she is what she is willing to compromise on is subject to negotiations with the Labour Party. If that is the case, how can she so categorically rule out a people's vote? And why is she apparently removing that option as part of any future negotiations and compromise conversations?
Prime Minister.
I refer the honourable lady to the answers I've given earlier in response to questions about a second referendum.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Businesses have been increasing their stocks of raw materials, components and finished goods in order to avoid the damaging disruption of a no-deal departure from the EU. And in the process, they've incurred substantial additional costs on warehouse housing and been tying up capital that otherwise would be available for investment. What advice would the Prime Minister give to businesses as to how long they need to continue with that process?
The Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend, it's absolutely right, of course, to identify the uncertainties that businesses face and the actions that they're taking in the face of those uncertainties. I think what I would say to businesses is that I hope they would see that the government, in reaching out to the opposition, is genuinely trying to find a way through this and being able to do that within a timescale that gives them the certainty as soon as possible.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the government's motion on the EU on Tuesday could only attract the support of about 40% of her own party's MPs, what guarantees do we have, should she reach agreement with the Leader of the Opposition, that any deal could actually get the support of her own party?
Well, I think the honourable gentleman will look and see that actually support for the withdrawal agreement has been growing on this side of the House. We are looking to see if we can find that, as he knows, that point of agreement with the opposition that would truly command a majority of this House and enable us to ensure that we can get the legislation necessary through.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for listening to the House and working with the European Union to avoid a no deal. A no deal would have cost manufacturing greatly, and Jaguar Land Rover, which is centred around my constituency, £1.2 billion a year, which would threaten its very viability. However, does the Prime Minister agree with her Secretary of State for International Trade that a customs union would actually, between the UK and the EU, would actually be the worst of both worlds?
What we are looking for is to ensure that we can obtain the benefits of a customs union that have been identified in the political declaration. We are continuing to move forward on that. Of course, there is the question of trade policy. We believe it's right to have a good trade agreement with the European Union for the future, but also to have good trade agreements and an ability to negotiate those trade agreements with the rest of the world too.
We conclude with a question from the distinguished chair of the Procedure Committee, Charles Walker.
It goes without saying that I look forward to joining the Prime Minister in delivering Brexit in Broxbourne. So can I just say to the Prime Minister in concluding this, I have nothing left to say on Brexit until at least another week has passed. So will she join the rest of the House in having a few days off next week? And before she leaves this place tonight, can she suggest to the Chief Whip that he has a few solid 12-hour sleeps as well?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his sentiments? I'm sure everybody across the whole of this House is looking forward to the opportunity to actually take some time to reflect on the issues that we're dealing with in this House, to do this away from this chamber, and I will certainly pass his request on to the Chief Whip.
Thank you.